Hi there, Henry from 911 Virgin, the Porsche people in Uxbridge. Welcome to another video. I recently did a video on this car, which is a 991.1, so the first generation of the 991 GT3 touring spec car. We've actually got two of those in stock, got that one and the one behind it, and we've just taken this in stock, and I thought worth doing a video. This is a 991.2, so the second generation of the 991 GT3, so second generation GT3, and it's also a Club Sport, so thought it'd be interesting to compare the differences between both the Gen 1 and Gen 2 cars, and also see what a Club Sport entails. In terms of the car, you will see there's a few changes between this Gen 2 and the Gen 1. Kind of front end of the car changes a little bit. You've got these kind of air intake spats here, sort of cooling air towards sort of rads and brakes and so on, taking the air in there. The front chin spoiler differs as well, very slightly. You'll see the Gen 1 has a slightly further, it sticks out slightly further there. So, you know, a few changes. This has got LED cornering headlights on it as well, so there's some kind of spec changes between cars as well, but some of the differences are kind of model changes. In terms of the big difference on this, because it's a Club Sport car, the interior, so instead of the comfort seats, you've got the 918 carbon sport seats in this, so really kind of hug you, and you know, quite an attractive cut of seat. It, as I said in the first video we made with the GT3, you know, it's really hard, and I think different people want different things out of these cars, and it's very tempting, particularly when you look on the forums. I think sometimes people sort of, to say they follow the crowd, but it's almost you're kind of flexing your muscles a bit. Oh yeah, I want, you know, sport seats, and I want this and I want that, and I'm gonna, you know, track the Nürburgring, and I can go around there faster than anyone else. And I think the reality is, you know, there's people who just want to have them on the road and want a different use out of the car. They still want the direct drive of a GT3, but they're not necessarily going to use it as a track day weapon. So, you know, these are a really nice seat, but it's not going to be for everyone. You know, the comfort seats will appeal to some other people. The other thing you'll notice in the back of this car, there's a load of scaffolding in the back of it. It's got a half cage in there. It's not particularly to stiffen the car, it's more to provide a mounting for the race harnesses. If you want the full race harnesses, you need a mount behind your shoulders, so you can fit the race harnesses there. And also, if you happen to put it on its lid, it's going to give you a bit of extra protection, stop you squashing yourself. So, you know, if you are going to kind of do track days in anger, potentially you've got a bit of extra protection with a half cage in there. You know, some people don't necessarily want that. They want to use, although there's no seats in the back of these, they want to use it for kind of storage and you know, put sort of stuff in there which you can't do with a cage in there. So but you'll get that Club Sport, half cage, and the sport seats. The other thing, the rear spoiler changed slightly on the car. It's quite subtle, but it gives you 20% extra downforce for no extra drag. Ordinarily, if you've got extra downforce, the trade-off is drag. Porsche have obviously sort of found a bit of a gain in terms of the drag, and then offset that against giving it a bit of extra downforce. You'll also notice on the back of the car the air intakes for the kind of ram air induction, or the air going into the car. Gen 1 cars, it's a single piece air intake to the engine. You've got two separate pods, or two separate inlets on the Gen 2 cars. Rear lights change. And also you've got a bit of a difference in the rear PU, the setup of the rear bumper. Again, slightly different styling for aero gains and so on. So, you know, the differences are kind of quite subtle, but they are there. Now, the other change which took place on these Gen 2 cars is, you will see if you look carefully, it says GT3 4.0. So with the Gen 2 cars, Porsche had quite a on a normal C2S, the engine went from 3.8 litre normally aspirated down to a 3 litre twin turbocharged car. The GT3, however, remained normally aspirated and increased from 3.8 to 4 litre. You got an extra 25 horsepower and 20 newton meters of torque. That meant that the top speed, if you were worried that 196 miles an hour was just too slow, the new Gen 2 car did 198 miles an hour, so extra 2 miles an hour at the top speed, which will be very, very useful. So different engine, bit more powerful, and also the Gen 2 car was available with a manual gearbox. Quite an interesting little feature to point out. I say interesting, I'm a very boring man, I don't get out very much these days, so to me it's interesting. Normally on engine lids you've got a couple of hydraulic rams which hold the lid up and then you just close it. On this car, to save a few ounces in weight, you have a little clip here which you lift the lid up slightly, push the clip down and then it releases it. So they don't have gas struts, they've got a little mechanical clip, so now you know. The manual gearbox in normal 991 is a 7-speed manual gearbox. The GT3, if you went for a manual gearbox, it was a 6-speed, not a 7-speed. This car's got a PDK. There is, again, if you go on the forums, the traditional response is, oh great, I want a manual gearbox. I'm gonna pin my flag to a mast and I'm gonna say, if I was gonna have one of these, I'd actually have a PDK car, and even if I was going to do track days in it. For me, there's two big gains with a PDK gearbox. The PDK box in this car, we'll take it out for a drive in a minute, and so we'll see how it actually drives on the road. But when you're accelerating, you get kind of free time, because with a manual gearbox you have to put your foot on the clutch, you take the power off the car, you change gear, you release the clutch, and so you introduce the power, and you get a sawtooth effect. When you look at the speed curve, when you log it, it drops down when you make a gear change, comes back up again, and that drop down is reasonably significant. Whereas with a PDK, you keep your foot flat on the floor, the power is applied constantly, so it's a constant curve. So in accelerating, a PDK is quicker than a manual car. And the other thing that I like about these, particularly for track use, is when you brake hard, the PDK gearbox uses engine braking and does kind of heel and towing for you, and so the car seems to kind of brake flatter because you're using the engine braking. If you try to replicate that in a manual car, you're trying to basically increase the engine revs with your heel, you're then braking with your toe, and that's why it's called heel and toe. And the theory is that as you go down the gear, you need to increase the engine revs to match engine revs with the gear you're in. And the reality is it's a really difficult thing to do, and most people, when they try to do it in anger properly on a racetrack, will get it wrong, and you end up that the engine brakes the rear of the car too much, and it'll break away the car, because you're not using the hydraulics to do the braking. You're slowing it with the mechanics of the engine, and as I say, it destabilizes the car. With the PDK gearbox, it does that all for you, and it decelerates the gears very quickly, keeps the car nicely balanced. So I'm a big fan of the PDK box, and you know, particularly for kind of track days, it's quite a nice thing to have, and it sort of it makes you a bit of a hero, you know, both in terms of your acceleration and then when you're braking hard into a corner. So for me, I think a PDK gearbox is a nice thing to have. Right then, the proof of the pudding with the GT3, of course, is in the driving. These Gen 2 cars probably feel slightly less mechanical, less agricultural than the Gen 1 cars. It's still a very direct drive. You hear more cabin noise, you get more feedback from the road and so on, but it's just very slightly softer feeling in terms of sort of suspension, maybe gear change, just in terms of the way it sort of either releases the diff or changes gear. The PDK car, you had to have a manual differential in it, limited slip differential. The PDK, you've got quite a clever electronic setup. You've got torque vectoring and so on, so it's quite an intelligent drive still with the car. But it does just maybe feel slightly less agricultural. As I said earlier, I actually quite like the PDK. I know that, you know, the kind of purists are going to say, oh no, you've got to have a manual car. Here's the weird thing. You would think that the manual car would be the kind of track day warriors gearbox of choice. If I was going to do a track day in this, I'd actually rather have the PDK gearbox, because I like that flat braking when it's really hard, and it's quicker going up through the gears. So I'm not sure I'd take a manual gearbox in this car. I quite like this PDK. It's still a really well behaved car. It's a horrible day, it's the start of January, it's cold, it's wet. You know, traditionally you just wouldn't want to take out a sort of GT3 car like this in this weather. And I have to say, it's like really friendly. You know, it's at no point do you feel sort of compromised or it's dangerous. Yeah, it's a very, very usable car, and it's a very friendly car in terms of how it's doing. Still very direct. You know, you get lovely kind of feedback through the car, so you know what it's doing. But it's not skittish. It's not nervous in any way, and that's nice on a cold, wet day like today. With the Gen 2 cars, you've got an upgraded or updated infotainment system. So you've got things like Apple CarPlay on it for the first time. So that's another benefit or bonus of the Generation 2 991 GT3. Still get a PDK Sport button in this, so we can change the change profile of the gearbox if we want a sport mode, and also the suspension, so we can go up for a firm chassis if we're going to do track days or track work, but a more compliant chassis if we're going to be on the road for normal driving. As I said, you do get an extra 2 miles an hour top speed, extra 25 horsepower, so top speed on this goes up to 198 miles an hour. And as with a Gen 1 car, you know, I'm not struggling to keep up with the natural flow of traffic with that sort of power on hand, so you know, it's not going to let you down in that respect. These sport seats are a really, you know, they hug you, and a you know, well proportioned gentleman such as my good self is incredibly well supported. You know, they're not difficult to get in and out of. It's easier in the comfort seats to get in, and actually the comfort seats do still give you a fairly good level of support. These just take it kind of one step further. You don't have the ease of adjustment that you would have in a comfort seat in terms of changing the settings on the seat. It's a more involved job if you want to make any changes there on with nuts and bolts and so on. But yeah, obviously grips you nicely, and they do look, you know, rather attractive, that's for sure. You get that lovely blip on the downshift on braking with this PDK box. As I say, I love that, and for me it's almost a deceleration and engine braking benefit on a PDK gearbox that kind of sells it to me, really. I just love that, how the car stays really flat under braking, and it's doing the kind of heel and towing for you, and it feels a lovely balanced car, you know, when you're braking hard with the PDK box. Well, I hope you found that useful. As I say, it's a bit of a sort of wet, miserable day, really. So, you know, not ideal for sort of eking out the the ultimate performance on a GT3, but I did want to just make a quick video, take it out just to highlight some of the differences between the Gen 1 and Gen 2 991 GT3s, and also the difference between the Touring and the Club Sport spec. And so I hope you found that, you know, maybe useful. Enjoy your cars. Stay tuned. If you want to subscribe, you'll see whenever we put new videos out. But in the meantime, look after yourselves. Have a very healthy and prosperous 2024. I'm Henry. We're 911 Virgin, the Porsche people in Uxbridge. Goodbye.